And welcome back to the Footy Frontline Podcast, brought to you by my betting mate, Nick D'Urbano and Oliver Caffrey, here to review all the action from a jam-packed round 10. Ollie, plenty of big talking points to come out of the weekend. I guess what better way to start with a team that has significantly dipped over the last couple of years, but in particular this year, the Tigers.
Yeah, unbelievable fall from grace from Richmond. You go back a few years and they're winning premierships. They're in a golden era. 3 premierships in 4 seasons, but yeah, how the mighty have fallen. 119-point loss at the Gabba on Saturday night. They never looked in it at all. It was ugly right from the first bounce and never got any better. Injuries galore in the VFL as well. They got absolutely smashed. So they're short on soldiers. And yeah, it was actually their biggest loss since the end of 2016 against Sydney. So that was a very famous night for a lot of reasons. But then they went on and won the premiership next season. So things can turn around. But yeah, it's looking very grim for the Tigers right now.
Well, yeah, I remember that game, man, in terms of SVN talkback afterwards. You know, one day Mario from Doncaster is feeling shortly after that game, I'm sure it would have been, you know, not a happy day in the Mario from Doncaster household. But
if only it was Friday night, you could ring in Finey.
Yeah.
Because Finey's only Friday night these days. It was Friday and Saturday night back in the day. But yeah, if it's only Friday night, Mario could have called in and given his thoughts on that disaster at the Gabba.
Finey would have been having a field day, because imagine if he was on Saturday and had the Saints losing as well. You know, as we know, Finey, a big Saints fan, you know, having the Saints losing against the Dockers and then having the Tigers losing against Brisbane, he would have been having a field day. He would have been, you know, already in a mood. And then having the Tigers fans calling him might have, you know, been able to change things just a little bit. But really, as you said, 119-point loss. This, if ever there was rock bottom, this is it right here. It's probably been as bad as Richmond have been, as you mentioned. Probably even worse than 2016.
Oh, far worse at the moment. Yeah.
This has gone back to, you know, the Terry Wallace sort of era of, you know, the late 2000s. And, you know, even you think back to that loss they had against Geelong back in 2007. Yeah. This is probably as bad as it's going to be. You know, another big injury on the weekend, the VFL, you mentioned Sam Naismith, a 4th ACL more than likely for him. That's just a cruel blow. They're down to, I don't even know if they're going to really be able to field an emergency list against the Bombers this week. I mean, it's so hard to really say where to from here, because, you know, are they even going to be able to field a team in the coming weeks with all these injuries and everything that's happening there?
Oh, it's going to be a massive struggle. It already has been. They still had, the crazy thing about it is they still had 11 premiership players out on the Gabba on Saturday night, but yeah, they're just not performing to standard at all. Dustin Martin's obviously on his last legs. Has to be his last season. There's talk that even he'll call it quits after his 300s in a few weeks. Shea Bolton, really disappointing this season. He's been way down. You thought, okay, he should be in his prime. He's been a great player for a long time, but yeah, just isn't leading from the front. And those younger players just aren't up to it yet. And yeah, there's reports about, confusion around the game plan, and yeah, everything seems to be just falling apart for the Tigers. Obviously, Brendan Gale's off to Tasmania. He's off at the end of the season. They've had Damien Harwick leave last year. They had Peggy O'Neill. Those 3 people, they were the key pillars of that premiership era, and they'll all be gone by the end of the season. So, yeah, there's going to be some pain for Richmond supporters, but they've had it pretty good for the last decade. Yeah. I think they'll take the 3 premierships if they're going to have this little period where they'll need to rebuild. But, yeah, it's going to be a really tough season. And we've spoken many times on this podcast about North Melbourne, where their first win's coming from. Maybe North can bring it up against the Tigers, because they're just going to be decimated. North, yeah, they're young, but they don't have the injuries that Richmond do. So maybe that is their one chance of the win. So, yeah, really tough debut season for Adam Uze. It's not going to get... He said on the weekend in his press conference, hopefully this is rock bottom. But with the injuries they've got, it could get actually even worse. Essendon will smell blood on the weekend in the Dreamtime game. Richmond are really better than in recent times. Essendon got the win last year, but yeah, they'll smell some blood, and yeah, might want to make it a big one as well.
God, that win against Sydney feels like an eternity ago.
Unbelievable.
It shapes up as an even more of an outlier now when you look back.
Incredible.
And it's incredible to think that even during that patch, Richmond were very competitive. I mean, they almost beat Carlton as well, you know, like they were playing some pretty good football, but you lose players. I feel like the confidence is now just gone when the losses are piling up and when you have the injuries that keep on coming. I mean, it's it's so hard to see when things would turn around for the Tigers. I mean, maybe when they get some players back later in the year, they might get a few wins, whatever, but it's looking like it's going to be a tough few years for Richmond, where they might just really have to start again. It might be some, I mean, it was, I think it was Matthew Lloyd who said it, there might have to be some tough conversations at the end of the year with some players who have been there and done that, premiership heroes, and asking, do you really see your future here, or is it better served that we facilitate a trade and, maybe just start again and look to go to the draft or with a completely new batch. So we'll see what happens with the Tigers. We'll talk about that game against the Bombers later on in the show as well. Let's head on over to the South Australian teams, because it was a contrasting weekend for them, because on Saturday we had the Crows, who were so gallant. It's a bit of controversy with how that game finished against the Pies, another tight loss against Collingwood, and then Port Adelaide the following day, coming from literally nowhere to beat Hawthorn in a game that they had no right to win, down by 11 points with just over 30 seconds to go, and they somehow win it by a point. I mean, let's start with the Crows. I mean, they did well to battle back into that game and then take the lead. They actually played really well on Saturday against the Pies. They dominated the inside 50s. They had so much of the ball in there. They couldn't convert, but they finally took the lead, and then Collingwood were able to retake it late through Jordan De Goey, and then it all came down to that play late. Isaac Rankin bursting down the wing. Did he run too far? I mean,
he definitely ran too far, and I think the commentary around this is a bit ridiculous.
Yeah,
just because umpires don't usually pay it, it doesn't mean you can't pay it when it should be paid. It was a free kick, so the umpire made the right call. Yeah, there have been many instances, even at the Gabba on Saturday night, even a few hours after that game, you saw Harry Sharp go on a few runs, and that clearly looked to be over 15 metres, didn't get paid. But yeah, the umpire technically made the right call. So I don't think there's as much controversy as what people are saying there is. It's just so hard for the Crows after what they've been through since that Ben Keys game last year when they were denied a final spot, and just been on the wrong end of so many tough losses. Yeah. Even the draw last week, they're probably kicking themselves. They should have won that as well against the Lions. So, there's so much heartache against Collingwood over the years in recent times, but even you go back to 2009, the semi-final, when
right in front of me,
right in front of me. Yeah, they always go back to that. It's just so tough for the Crows, because they were so gallant, so brave at the MCG to almost knock off Collingwood. But Jordan Goey really stood up when his team needed him in his first game back after a few weeks out. So it's just really painful for the Crows at the moment. They're not a bad side, but they're not up to the standard of Collingwood, especially in those close games. They're just the masters of those close finishes. I think most people watching that game would have said, we've seen this film before. Collingwood are going to get up in a close one. Doesn't matter if they can see a lead late, they'll still get up and find a way. Yeah. It's what they've done under Craig McRae. They're such a good finishing side. The hallmarks of their game are just right in there in the last quarter. You can just see how they're able to shut out games and get the lead back when they need to, but also shut the game down and protect the lead when they actually need to as well.
It's a shame that the last three games between these sides have actually had, it seems like they've all been great games, but there's always been an umpiring decision that has sort of overshadowed it when we talk about the game post. Like, we talk about in the discourse, we're here on the Monday recording this, so we're not talking so much about the game, but all the discourse just been about one decision. I mean, the first time they met last year, it was that missed when Nathan Murphy got knocked in the face. They didn't pay the free kick for a high, and it clearly looked like a high free kick. And then there was, I think, in the same play, a free kick at Adelaide won, I think, for a 50. I forgot exactly what it was, but it was something that was missed, and the AFL had to come out and say it was missed. The second time they met, Jordan Dawson should have probably had a free kick inside 50. That would have been to potentially win the game. And then this week we have the Isaac Rankin one. And I mean, to put it bluntly, we don't know whether Adelaide actually get a shot on goal from it, even if there's a big contest there. There's every chance that ball gets killed dead. It's out for a throw-in, and Collingwood are able to sit on it for the last 10 seconds. So, I mean, if it gets played, play on, and then, the game's over, then it's like, well, whatever. Collingwood fans aren't going to probably be crying foul about it running too far, even if Adelaide do go and kick a goal. So, it is what it is.
I think they would be. I definitely think they would be. I don't know. Be up in arms about it.
I think that there was another decision earlier in that quarter that was a little bit more controversial, and that led to Rankin's goal, where Mark Keane clearly dropped the ball when Joe Richards tackled him, which I think was more of actually a clear miss of a holding the ball, which I think's just been completely sort of forgotten about. But regardless, the game's done. Time to, move on. Adelaide are actually hitting some good form at the moment. I think they can still take some confidence out of it despite not getting 4 points on the board. But Port Adelaide, conversely, they were down by 41 points. This game looked over, especially in the wet. Ollie Wines going down as well with heart palpitations. Everything was going against them. But then they just found a way. Late free kick. Rioli kicks the goal and they just go bang from the centre. I mean, Hawthorn just, shut up shop so early. They just parked the bus for the last quarter and Port Adelaide just bombarded them. And then they probably, at the end of the day, they probably deserved to get the 4 points because Hawthorn, they had no sort of intent to go and try and kill the game off. They were just happy to sit back and they sat back way too deep, way too early.
Oh, way too early. I watched this whole game all the way through and Hawthorn, they would be ruining this game. How the hell they lost that? They were brilliant early, jumped Port like Port did to Geelong the week before. Blake Hardwick, unbelievable. Just absolute dead eye. Anytime he gets a goal, anytime he gets a shot inside 50, he's nailing a goal from whatever spot. But yeah, they just went too safe, too early. I don't know if it was a lack of legs or it was the game plan, but they just looked out on their feet where Port were coming and coming and coming. But you still thought, okay, Hawthorn are going to hang on.
Yeah.
It's going to be a bit of heartbreak for Port. They had a great comeback, but they're still going to fall short. But, yeah, it's unbelievable to score 2 goals in the last 30 seconds of a game. I think 2019, Melbourne did something similar to the Gold Coast Suns up there.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it was an unbelievable finish like that one. But, yeah, that was more of a topsy-turvy sort of game. It wasn't Hawthorn had literally been in front for the whole game up until the dying seconds. The ball goes
22, 26 seconds, I think it was for the whole game. They led. Yeah.
They kicked the goal and, that's not even including actual game time. That's including the break in between the goal. It goes back to the centre and the siren goes straight away. It took me back to 2005, the semi-final, Sydney-Geelong, where something similar happened there. So, Hawthorn would be just devastated to not win that game. And Port, maybe that's the win that can sort of kickstart their season because their supporters would have been wanting blood if they'd won in Geelong, one of their best wins under Ken Hinkley, and then to go home and lose against Hawthorn, a probably bottom 4, bottom 6 side, the fans would have been just calling for blood. They would have been calling the talk back and, Ken Hinkley probably would have been under a bit of pressure again. But, they win that game and that doesn't get spoken about and they're contending in the top 4. So that's a huge win for Port and just, obviously devastating for Hawthorn.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing is it has been now for the last few years, every time that there is a big loss that Port Adelaide have, especially against a team that they should beat, every loss is put even more under the microscope considering the situation with Ken Hinkley. He's been there since 2013. They still haven't won a premiership. They still haven't gotten to a grand final. They've had so many, near misses of getting there and then the final hurdle, they'll just fall short at that prelim. With the change in leadership on the board with Warren Treadray coming in, Josh Carr just waiting in the wings. It seems like every time that there's a loss or something, the heat just comes onto Ken Hinkley straight away. So that just alleviates things slightly, but it's still just going to get ramped up again with the second they have a loss when they should beat a side. But look, they've got, North Melbourne this weekend. You think they'll be able to win that game quite easily. But, when that game comes against a team that they should be beating at home or whatever it might be, it's going to be fascinating to see how that discourse plays out. Because as much as it was a win, it's not a win to kind of go around and say, geez, we're back, we're here, we're going to potentially, go and make a real crack at it. Yeah, the Geelong win was good. But then you saw how Geelong played against Gold Coast last week. Does that kind of change things a little bit maybe for Port Adelaide? We'll see in the coming weeks because, you know what, look, it wasn't necessarily a convincing win by any stretch against the Hawks. Let's have a look to round 11, Thursday night footy, Doggies versus Sydney. This game's sort of now become a little bit more fascinating because the Bulldogs went to Sydney. They knocked off the Giants on Saturday twilight. The Swans are flying at the moment. They're looking like the team to beat. It's going to be a cracking game at Marvel Stadium. How do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, the Bulldogs have really put in a great last couple of weeks. Obviously, Luke Beveridge was under the pump there, losing to Hawthorn a few weeks ago. But yeah, 2 really good wins since. Just smashed Richmond like a lot of teams probably will in the second half of the season. But yeah, to go up to Western Sydney, get the job done against the Giants, they really should have won by a lot more. The goal kicking was atrocious, wet conditions, tough conditions. But yeah, the Giants just looked completely out of sorts, and the Bulldogs made them look silly at times.
Yeah.
And it should have been probably a 30, 40, 50-point win. So, this shapes as an absolute cracker on Thursday night at Marvel Stadium. And, Sydney go in with just super form. They got jumped by Carlton on Friday night at the SCG, but responded really well. And, it says a lot about the Swans when Luke Parker, former captain, he's just been a great of that club, can't get back into the team. And, I don't know if it was a bit of frustration there playing in the VFL. He's going to get himself suspended with a high bump, and that will see him this week. So, he's staring at more time on the sidelines, which is incredible. But, Chad Warner, Isaac Heaney, they've got such a deep young midfield now that's just doing the job. Brodie Grundy has been superb, filling that ruck void in Sydney. So, I think the Swans are going to be too strong again. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Bulldogs got up just because it is a Marvel Stadium and they obviously play that ground well. And you'd think the Swans are probably due for another loss. They're a game and a half clear on top of the ladder already, which is incredible. So, they're going to be the hunted for the second half of the season. And, you wouldn't want to be peaking too early. But, they're looking very strong at the moment. So, I think the Swans by about 20 points on Thursday night.
Yeah, I think that Sydney win this game as well. Like, the Bulldogs, as you said, were great on Saturday in beating GWS, but I think as well GWS were just way off it. They were just not at the races at all, and the Bulldogs probably should have won that game by more. But Sydney are just flying at the moment. They just look so good. They, the speed that they've got coming out of that midfield is like nothing else. You spoke about Heaney and Warner and Goulden, all these players. Like it's mesmerising. And you saw against Carlton, who have such a good midfield, they made them look second rate, which is so rare that you see a midfield be able to take control of your Crippses and your Walshes. But they just have so much speed that not many teams can contend with. There's been a lot of chatter about the Bulldogs with their midfield being very forward-running players, attack-minded, not really two-way players. They've been better at it the last couple of weeks, but going up against this Sydney midfield, it's so hard to stop. It's a wave. So I think the Swans win this game. It'll be tight, though. I think the Bulldogs won't certainly disgrace themselves, but I think Sydney are going to be too good, and Chad Warner looking good for 25+ in that game as well. Friday night footy over in the West, Fremantle against Collingwood. This is going to be a big one because, again, the Pies still walking wounded. It seems like when they get 2 back, they lose another 2. Brodie Myercheck and Bo McCreary should be back for this game, but they're set to lose Will Hoskin-Elliott and Reef McInnes. So that patchwork forward line continues for another week, but the Dockers responded heading over to Marvel Stadium last week and beating the Saints. Going to be a big game over at Optus Stadium. Freo have been good at home, but taking on a Collingwood team that are red hot at the moment.
Freo have been very good at home, apart from that Sydney game when they really kicked in accurately. But such tough circumstances. You even passed for that one, considering what happened before the game with Cam McCarthy. So, their midfield is just so deep, so strong. Caleb Sarong is just a dominant force. I think he's still an underrated player, considering he plays for Freo, doesn't quite get the sort of attention that he does in Melbourne that he should get. But, this shapes as an absolute cracker, and I think the Dockers can cause an upset here.
Okay.
They did what they had to do at Marvel Stadium against the Saints. It was like we said, we predicted it was going to be it was going to be a scrappy affair. The two most defensive teams in the AFL, and very stale, boring sort of footy on Saturday night. But the Dockers came away with the win, and that's all you can ask for them at this point in time. So I think Collingwood going over there might be right for the picking, just with a few of those injuries that he mentions. And Fremantle's midfield is really up and going, and going to be hard for the Magpies to deal with.
This is a tough one. Because every team wants to say Collingwood's going to win this game. But you know what? There are still some signs, I think, at the moment, the forward line in particular, with all the outs. I mean, even if they get Brodie Myercheck and Bo McCreary back, they're still missing, the likes of Jamie Elliott. And even Hoskin-Elliott's played pretty well the last few weeks as well. And, they've got some players missing. We don't know Jordan Ngoe's status as well, because obviously that head knock late, whether there's any delayed concussion as well. I mean, at the moment, it looks like he's going to play. But it's going to be won and lost in the midfield. I mean, Collingwood's midfield recently has really stepped up. They were dominant in the middle against Adelaide. Scott Pendlebury was winding back the clock, with that incredible performance. Nick Dacos still looks like, a player who's going to charge home late in this Brownlow medal run. I'm going to go with my heart and say Collingwood win this game. They travel so well. I mean, they are a really good team on the road, and I think going over to Perth, they'll relish this opportunity, but it's going to be an arm wrestle. The Dockers are going to make this game very low scoring, and I think that this is going to be a tight one, but the Pies get up just, and Caleb Sarong looking good for 30+ in this one as well. Saturday afternoon over in Hobart, the winless Kangas up against Port Adelaide. North were good for about a half against the Bombers. They looked like they were showing a bit of fight. There was some improvement, but as the game went on, they just faded away against a good Essendon team at the moment that are right up there amongst them this year. Do you give the Kangaroos any chance down in Hobart, or do you think Port just get the job done and continue to get wins on the board here?
Yeah, that was probably North's best performance for 8 weeks since they probably should have won that game against Freo early in the season. But, yeah, down there, Port Adelaide smashed them down there last season. They've had a few opportunities to play on Blundstone Arena. So I think Port just relieved to get the job done at the Adelaide Oval against Hawthorn. And I think, they'll go down there and, put on a pretty big score against them. North, they were vastly improved against Essendon, I think, since they've had, a lot of bad losses. It blew out in the end, but I think the scoreline probably flattered Essendon a bit in the end. But, I can't see North Melbourne getting the job done here. And it'll be interesting to see what sort of crowd turns out for this one. They had a really poor turnout against Adelaide when North Melbourne played Adelaide down there about a month ago. And, it could be a pretty grim turnout for this one as well. So, I think Port Adelaide way too strong, probably 10+ goals. That's
disappointing given, that usually when North have started playing games in Hobart, they've had historically good turnouts there at Blundstone Arena. I mean, the excitement around the Tassie team and everything, you'd think that just footy fans might want to get down. But if North Melbourne's not winning games, I mean, what's the excitement in seeing a game that's more than likely going to be a blowout on Saturday afternoon? I think it's exactly where it's going. It's probably going to look like quite a big win for Port Adelaide. I don't think they're going to have any issues against North Melbourne, and Rioli looking good for multiple goals in this game as well. The other game at 1:45 on Saturday, the Blues against the Suns. This is an interesting one. I mean, Gold Coast flying at the moment, coming back from Darwin. That was probably one of their best wins ever against Geelong, albeit a banged-up Geelong team. But putting on 162 points on Geelong is unheard of. They take on the Blues. We know Gold Coast travels sort of away from being the home team. I mean, they've been so good as the home team, whether it's been in Gold Coast or in Darwin, but coming to Marvel Stadium against a Carlton team that have to respond. I mean, yes, their win against Melbourne a couple of weeks ago was a win and everything, but it's been really an unconvincing few weeks where they've had so many injuries and everything in that sense going against them, but they have to respond. They're falling outside the top 8, playing against a Gold Coast team, as we spoke about, flying at the moment.
Yeah, as we spoke about last week, just really inconsistent within games. You saw them charge out of the blocks against Sydney, but then just fell into a hole again. And they've done that all throughout games this season. You probably can't. It's very similar to last season. They are going better than they were this time last season, but they're just so inconsistent. You think, okay, they're the best team in the AFL right now, and then they go missing for a quarter and a bit. So, this is a really important game for the Blues. They can't afford to drop this one. But Gold Coast will be smelling a bit of blood here. It is going to be tough for them coming back from Darwin, although they do have the 9 days break. So, that was a really impressive win from the Gold Coast Suns. They looked electric. Just the way they handled the footy in humid conditions, kicking 160 points.
Unheard of.
Absolutely incredible. It was their biggest score in their history. So they're going to take a lot of confidence out of that. And you mentioned Geelong had a few guys out, but the Gold Coast Suns decided to rest a few players as well. They were without their co-captain, Jared Witts, who's been so integral to what they're doing the last few seasons. So I think Carlton, just because it's at home, they get the job done and they just have to win. There's going to be a bit of pressure on Michael Voss and the Blues this week because they have fallen outside the top 8. And, this is one they just can't afford to drop. So I think it'll be a tight one. I reckon it's going to come down to the wire, maybe even a goal, and the Suns will push them all the way. Suns
have a decent record against Carlton as well. They've beaten them a couple of times last year. They probably should have won that game late in the year up in Gold Coast, where they led for basically the whole game, and then Carlton came from the clouds late. Remember a couple of years ago during one of the COVID years, they actually beat them at Marvel Stadium, and that was basically the death blow in David Teague's reign as well. So Gold Coast won't be fazed by this. They've had the wood over Carlton for many years, so they've been a bit of a bogey team. But I think you're right. At Marvel Stadium, Carlton have to respond, and I think they're just going to be that little bit too strong for Gold Coast. But if Gold Coast can win this game, I think this would be the result that really sort of solidifies their credentials to potentially play finals this year. And I think they need a win on the road to really get that, just that. a bit of momentum away from home and show that they can get the job done away from whether it's in Queensland or in Darwin. So it'll be a fascinating one on Saturday afternoon, as will this one down in Geelong. Two teams who have lost their last 3 games. This game looked like a few weeks ago as a potential, battle between the grand final preview in a sense. But now it's almost desperation for both these two sides, Geelong and GWS. Both teams 3 losses in a row. Almost unheard of if we said this a few weeks ago.
Did not see it coming at all. The Giants were playing scintillating footy at the start of the year, and Geelong likewise. Their structure had just held up so well. They looked like the 2022 Cats, not the team that played last season and missed finals. But, the Cats have just fallen in a bit of a hole. 3 straight losses, but, back at home, they just don't lose 2 in a row down there. So it's going – GWS are going to be fired up for this one. They have a decent record.
Beat them down there last year.
They beat them down there last year, and that was sort of the catalyst for their run at the back end of the season. They went down there as massive underdogs. Massive underdogs. They were still struggling at that point in time, but they got the win down there and then just went on a crazy run towards the end of the season. Obviously got into that prelim final. But, the Giants are starting to lose a few players as well, and just some players down on form, just that were firing at the start of the season. So a bit of a slump. The Cats should get a few players back. Fingers crossed for them. Jeremy Cameron makes it back out of the concussion protocols. And, Tom Hawkins in his record-breaking game overtakes his great mate Joel Selwood as the game's record holder at Geelong. So I think all those factors, I think Geelong will get up and win by about 3 goals.
Yeah, I can't see Geelong losing this one at home, especially, if they've lost 3 in a row. They're going to be fired up for this one. I think they will bring those litany of stars who all got rested. Like, they were making late changes. Yeah. It was Chris Scott to, sort of what we've seen throughout
Sam McConing coming out now before the game.
Yeah. It's almost like they were content with going, all right, like, we might lose this
whatever
one.
Happens.
And we'll just bounce back the next week, even though they do come up against a GWS team that, when they're at their best, they're one of the best teams in the comp. I think they win this one, and then the blowtorch is really going to be on the Giants after this. If they don't win this game, it's going to be a lot of pressure on them, and suddenly it's looking a bit like last year again, but still, as we've seen with them, they can turn it around very quickly. But I think the Cats win this one at GMHBA Stadium. Saturday night, dream time. This game historically has been a Richmond dominance for many, many years until last year. But now it is looking like the Tigers have no hope against the Bombers. You'd hope that the Richmond fans that do come out, it's going to be a great spectacle as it always is, that they show something, they show a bit of fight and try and, make this game a little bit exciting and give the Bombers something. Is there any hope? Any hope for the Tigers against Essendon on Saturday night?
I don't think so, but Essendon, they weren't convincing against North Melbourne. And I know that we spoke last week, the fans do get nervous about the games they're supposed to win. So, maybe that might come into it. And, the heat is going to be on Richmond this whole week. Everyone knows the situation they're in, so they get a bit of leniency there just with all the injuries they have. But, it's just really surprising to go into a game and you see Richmond paying $10 to win a game.
Yeah.
You go back a few years ago and the opposition were paying that sort of money and Richmond were paying the $1.05 that Essendon are. So I think Essendon will get the job done, but it won't be the blowout that it was the last couple of weeks. They lost by 90 points and then 120. So surely it won't be that sort of margin again. But, they just have too many soldiers out, low on confidence. But, I can see some of their premiership players that they do have in, like, it's Dusty Martin. It'll be his last dream time, so he might get himself up for this one. But I think Essendon probably 5-6 goals. At least.
Look, I would love to see a close one. I'd love to see Richmond respond because I feel like if there's going to be any game for them to get up for, this is the one. They don't have. There's unfortunately for them, not every week for them is that marquee fixture like it used to be, where they'd fill out the G every single week and there'd be a real excitement around them. But they need to give the fans something. And I think if it's going to be any game that Adam Uze would naturally be able to get the players up and the natural leaders in that team to get the younger guys up for as well, it's this one. And I think there would be a sense for Richmond, like looking at what North Melbourne did and being like, well, they were able to kind of give them a little bit of a scare. Like, why can't we? Why can't we do the same thing? We've got enough guys. You spoke about they had double digits premiership players out there against Brisbane. Why can't we get up for this game? Why can't we give them a bit of a scare? Whether it's enough to win, I doubt. but I think they'll give them a bit of a push. And I think the Bombers still get up by about 4 goals. And I think Zach Merritt looking the goods to win the Yukon Award as well. I think, look, he's been unbelievable this year, one of the front runners to poll very well in the Brownlow as well. So the Bombers set to win this and stay second on the ladder, which, it's lofty heights for those Bombers fans. They're up and about.
They sure are.
On Sunday at Marvel Stadium, the Hawks versus Brisbane. Brisbane recording a big win last week. The Hawks, they'd be smarting after last week. But Brisbane, it was a win they needed to have. They're starting to find some momentum again, but they should, you'd think, be able to deal with the Hawks at Marvel Stadium.
The Hawks have been an absolute bogey team for the Lions. The Lions haven't beaten them since 2019.
Wow.
The last 4 years, the Hawks have got the job done, all been in Tasmania at the MCG. They won the game last year at the MCG.
Yeah, that's correct,
a few Lions fans going into this game a bit nervous. But I think at Marvel Stadium, the Lions play really well there. They have a great record. I think they won something like 8 of their last 9 there or something like that. And, the first time Brisbane have played Hawthorn at Marvel for a long time. They might not have ever played them there. It's usually at the MCG or in Tassie for the away game. So, the Lions look like they were back to their old selves on Saturday night. I know they were against depleted Richmond, but they were ruthless. And you don't often say that about the Lions. They can cruise when they get up to a pretty big margin and take the foot off the pedal, but they didn't at all. They were really, really impressive. And it was on the back of some of the younger players that have come in on the back of those injuries. They've had a terrible run with injury, like the Tigers have. 5 ACLs on the list at the moment. But, guys like Kyle Lohman kicked 5 goals on Saturday night. Harry Sharp, who I mentioned earlier, went on some really good runs, gave them a bit of pace that they haven't had. And, Dane Zorko, who you're going to mention in a bit, he was terrific. 40 possessions in the Q clash and then another 35 off half-back and just uses the ball so well. So I think just because it is at Marvel Stadium, the Lions will win by about 4 goals. But, Hawthorn, they're one of the most honest sides in the competition. They're probably bottom 4 for talent, maybe in bottom 2. I don't rate their list at all, but Sam Mitchell gets the best out of them, I think. And, he would be in for a tough week because he'd probably put the onus on him for losing that match because, like we mentioned, they just shut up shop too early and that is a game that's going to haunt them for a very long time. But, I think the Lions are on a bit of charge at the moment and will get the job done.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tight one because, as you said, Hawthorn have had a good record against Brisbane, but at Marvel Stadium, Brisbane play it like the Gabba. It's a running track for them out there as well. We've seen how good they've been there over the journey under Chris Fagan. I think they should win this game. Dane Zorko looking good for 25 plus. He's been so good recently. Considering there were questions about whether he'd even go on this year, and now all of a sudden it looks like he'd go on another 2 or 3 the way he's going at the moment. So very impressive stuff from Zorko, and I think the Lions start to make some inroads on the 8 with a win there. Sunday afternoon at the MCG, these two teams are under enormous pressure going into this one. Melbourne and St Kilda. The D's, they just fell to bits against West Coast. It was just unbelievable at Optus Stadium on Sunday, while the Saints, it's looking really, really dismal for them down at Moorabbin. It's that game on Saturday night felt as miserable could be for them. This is a big game for both these two sides. St Kilda need a win to give themselves any chance of turning what a season that looks basically done, turning that around. But Melbourne really need to win this game. So if they lose against St Kilda, there'll be serious questions asked about not just their flag candidacy, but really their finals candidacy as well.
Upset of the season on Sunday. Did not see that coming at all. I know the Eagles have been a lot better over at Optus Stadium this season than they have on the road. But, coming off that Collingwood loss at Marvel Stadium when they were just looked shocking. They looked like they were back to the 2022, 2023 form. But, that man again, Harley Reid, was up and about, just absolute superstar so early in his career, just putting bums on seats and just providing highlights weekly. It's just unbelievable the sort of stuff he's
daily
doing.
Over for some as well, the West Australian at the moment.
Back pages all week. They are sorted. So, it was an unbelievable game, and Melbourne didn't even look like it at all. Had no answers. Jake Lever went off early, so he'll miss this game against the Saints. And, Stephen May looked really out of form without he made some really poor mistakes down back without Jake Lever there. So, surely Melbourne respond because, like you mentioned, St Kilda are just in a horrible flat spot at the moment. All their good players are totally out of form. Their ball movement is non-existent. The speed that they were showing, and they have speed in their team. They have a lot of speed, but they're just not using it. Just the stagnant ball movement and the defensive-minded nature, it's just not stacking up this season. And I think it's probably a lost season for them. They just get some good draft picks this season because they do have a lot of young talent there. They're just all underperforming at the moment. And, yeah, it's a pretty disappointing season for the Saints fans after they showed a lot last season. To make the finals in Ross Lyon's first season back, you would have thought, okay, that's enough to build on. But, yeah, they've been absolutely nowhere since that Collingwood win early in the season. Even the wins they've had, Richmond and North Melbourne. And they were so unconvincing in that Richmond game. They just scraped through. They were diabolical in that first half and, haven't recovered since. So I think Melbourne, their season basically is on the line here. If they drop another game against a really lowly team, like, where does that leave them? But I think back at the MCG, they'll get the job done by about 4 goals.
I mean, they should win this one, Melbourne. But, there's this part of me that thinks the Saints might actually do it. I don't know what it is. It's funny speaking at the youngsters. It's like there's like a second, third year Blues that's just gone through all of them. Yeah. Mitch Owens, Mateus Filippo. Especially like Filippo just looks shot confidence-wise at the moment, especially on Saturday night. Like, we just couldn't get near it. He's dropping everything. He's obviously had there's been a bit of conjecture about, after he got dropped the week before and, with his agent on Twitter and everything like that. But I mean, this is a big game for both teams, and I'm going to go on a limb here and say the Saints win. I think they go to the G and they cause an upset. I think Melbourne are reeling at the moment. There's some significant frailties in that team, and they are struggling forward of the ball. But now with the signs of Jake Lever going down and missing this week due to concussion and Stephen May looking vulnerable, if St Kilda are able to make this game low scoring, it will suit them. Like the game against Fremantle, look, it was low scoring, but Fremantle kicked themselves. They kicked themselves out of that game for parts and kept St Kilda in it. So, you know what? I'm going to tip an upset here. I think the Saints respond. I think that Ross puts the rocket up them, and I think he gets them up for this, and there's going to be significant questions on Melbourne after this game. So, got to be a bit bold sometimes. Yeah. So, I could have real egg on my face after this one, but get back in the Saints. Tipping Bailey Fritsch to kick multiple goals in this game as well. Final game of the round, Adelaide versus West Coast. I think this game could be a sneaky game of the round candidate because West Coast, if they can replicate what they can do at Optus Stadium at Adelaide Oval against an Adelaide team right now that have found some form, but without Isaac Rankin after that, we spoke about that run, what that run meant. He tore his hamstring, unfortunately. This is a big game for both teams because Adelaide really need to win this game to, after so many near misses, to get back on the winners list and get back in finals contention.
Yeah, I don't see it happening at all. I think Adelaide back at home will destroy them.
Wow.
Well, not destroy them to the extent they did in both games last season. They just made mincemeat of them in both games, and Taylor Walker went absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
Kicked 10 of 9 against them. It won't be like that, but yeah, the Crows will be absolutely smarting after what happened at the MCG last Saturday. So yeah, the Eagles on the road have shown how frail they can be on the road away from Optus Stadium. So I think the Crows, they're playing some pretty good footy, really. Isaac Rankin, like you mentioned, it's a massive loss, but I think they can cover his absence, and yeah, it should be a pretty comfortable win for the Crows in my point of view.
I think Adelaide win this game, but I genuinely think West Coast is going to push them. I think that they will go on the road really fired up for this one because that was probably, as much as they'd won that derby and that was impressive, that was their best win. It probably since that Collingwood win in 2022, but that was just so impressive. The one thing that I'm disappointed we're not going to see is Reid versus Rankin this week. I feel like that would have just dominated the entire discourse leading into two of the best young players in the competition going head-to-head.
Adelaide Advertiser, the West Australian paper. Yeah. Imagine the hype. Imagine the back pages all week. It would have been sensational.
It would have been incredible to see. Just that would have been the story in of itself, looking at what the newspaper is every single morning. But but I think that Adelaide will win this game. As much as West Coast will push them, I think Adelaide are going to be too strong. But Jake Waterman's been in really good form for the Eagles. I think he's looking good for multiple goals in this game. Where that's come from, because he's
been unbelievable.
Yeah, there were questions about his future in the game after some of the injuries he'd sustained, but now he's back and he's playing some really good footy, and it's great to see. I mean, it's definitely a bright spark for West Coast, considering they haven't had many, but Jake Waterman's certainly been that over the last few weeks. So
I can't recall a play just coming from nowhere to all of a sudden just be one of the best forwards in the competition. Yeah. He's put it together for 6 weeks now. It's not just a flash in the pan where, he's had a few good weeks. He generally looks like he's one of the best forwards in the competition. And, yeah, they needed Josh Kennedy retired a couple of years ago. He was a great of that footy club, and they've sorely missed him since. But Jack Wardham has just stood up. He's great mark, a great kick, and it's such a great story, as you mentioned, that had all those health issues just very recently, and he's come back and he's going to get a pretty good contract the next one he signs, and it's a terrific story.
Well, I mean, Kennedy retiring, Oscar Allen's constant injuries, Jack Darling's, Jack Darling was actually pretty good against Melbourne, kicked 3 goals, but, he has started to show that he's getting a little bit older now, hasn't played at the same level he was. He's stepped up and he's been brilliant. But I think going back to the game, I think the Crows will be too strong. Just 2 little tips as well. We forgot for Carlton Gold Coast, Patrick Cripps 25+, and Geelong GWS, Tom Green 25+ in that game as well. That's all we've got time for today. Ollie, thank you very much for joining me yet again.
Thanks, Nick. Should be another good round of footy.
Yeah, it should be a cracker. So we're back next week to review round 11. Enjoy the weekend in footy.